All right, everybody, welcome into the YouTube channel. Man, this is what I missed about this Minnesota fraud. I already did a video on this earlier, but this is another high-level edited research video that somebody else did. I wanted to get at it and see what they're talking about. So let's go ahead and get into it, man, because that Minnesota fraud is crazy.
The bigger picture is whether America built a system that lets this happen. Because if scammers can steal millions of tax dollars in Minnesota, what's stopping the same thing from happening to yours? And in this video, you're about to learn, Lear, that maybe it was never designed to stop. So to understand how America as a whole built a system that rewards fraud, we first have to understand how it starts. And what I found looking at Minnesota is a consistent pattern in that it doesn't just start in one place, it grows in connection. And so to show you exactly what I mean, let's start with the viral daycare fraud in Minnesota.
It's a whole web. It all connects from this fraud connects to this fraud connects to this scam, and then this scam connects to this shady person. That's why it's so hard to dismantle. And it goes back decades.
So if you haven't seen it, Nick Shirley's video showed a number of daycare centers that were receiving state funds but looked completely empty.
And there are no children. Every facility that you go to, the windows will be blocked out so you can't see in. There's nobody here. You won't see a single child at any of these facilities.
And these daycares were receiving public money through Minnesota's Child Care Assistance Program, or CCAP. And CCAP is a government program that covers most or all of the cost of daycares for that single mother working 2 jobs. But the key detail you need to remember here is that the money doesn't just go to the parents to pay the daycare. It goes directly to the daycare providers, where now the more kids a daycare claims to watch, the more money it receives. And it's exactly this incentive structure that's consistent and connects across all of their schemes. And what happened in 2013 is the perfect example. One Minneapolis daycare owner, Yasmin Ali, was taking advantage of this exact thing by recruiting employees' own children to claim more money. And what the investigation revealed was that not only was she pocketing $4 million, but more importantly, she was involved in other fraud. Turns out she was also fraudulently getting $90,000 in public money to pay for kids' meals. And the business that supposedly did the catering was run by her brothers. So this is where the connection builds and leads me directly to another type of fraud. And in fact, this type of fraud is Minnesota's largest fraud to date still, and it all happened in 2022.
Before long, the scheme that began with a simple idea in March of 2020 grew to become the largest pandemic fraud in the United States.
During the pandemic, millions of low-income children lost access to free meals they normally received at school. So to fill the gap, the government expanded the child nutrition program to help feed the children directly. And under this program, restaurants, nonprofits, and community centers could receive government subsidies for serving these meals to these kids, but only if they operated under the supervision of a sponsoring organization who would make sure that no shady shit was going on. I'm sure you can already guess what happened, but one of the sponsoring organizations was this nonprofit called Feeding Our Future. Not only did they approve virtually anyone willing to participate, they recruited more than 250 shell meal sites across Minnesota using fake paperwork and invoices. And between 2019 and 2021, they managed to steal $200 million for 91 million meals that were never served. 78 individuals were charged, and what they found was a shocking system of...
They stole over $200 million in just fake food?
Kickbacks, where employees also took bribes disguised as consulting fees to push through fraudulent claims. And so instead of feeding kids, they use that money to buy luxury homes, cars, and vacations abroad. And in one of the most extreme cases, investigators literally found this defendant with more than $700,000 in cash, a luxury boat, multiple vehicles, property in Nairobi, and even an entire resort complex on the Indian Ocean.
Get these crazy Somalis out of here, man. Pack them up and get them out of here, man. They over here stealing our money, and then they going over here leaving like kings and queens over there in East Africa, man. Over there got villas in Nairobi. Do you know what $700,000 in USD will get you in Somalia, Nairobi, Zimbabwe? They own the whole strip. They own the whole villa.
Now, Abdiaziz Farah is headed to federal prison for 28 years for his role in stealing taxpayer money meant to help feed kids during the pandemic.
So if it wasn't disturbing enough to steal money from hungry children, what the investigation found was that at least 26 of the charged individuals held contracts with other Minnesota state agencies. And again, the connection grows, and turns out many of those defendants were specifically involved in fraud that involved Medicaid. So hopefully you're really starting to see how connected this all is, and later on how it's going to expand nationwide. In fact, this might be the worst example of how exactly it grows nationwide. In 2020, Minnesota launched the Housing Stabilization Services, a Medicare-funded benefit to help people with disabilities or mental health conditions struggling to find housing. And just like the other fraud, the program didn't pay the rent. It paid providers to help clients find apartments, which means a goldmine for opportunists. In one of the most extreme cases, 2 men flew in from Philadelphia, registered LLCs as HSS providers, and used the names of low-income residents from homeless shelters to submit fake claims. They call themselves the housing guys, but obviously they didn't help with anything except pocketing $3.5 million over 18 months and inspiring more fraud. Because soon after, their success inspired an
See, it's just fake. It's all fake, man. They coming in here, they coming into fake shelters. They over here acting like they're going to help. They're going to apply for these fake funding and grants in the government. And then they're not going to help the homeless. They're not going to help the shelters. They're going to take their money. This is why be very careful on what you donate to and what you support. And whose side. Always be critical on which side is doing all this philanthropy when somebody's doing a whole lot of philanthropy. Always be wary of that.
An entire fraud economy that scaled around HSS, where recruitment networks even emerged to supply fake clients and paperwork to these HSS scammers. And by mid-2025, state officials acknowledged large-scale fraud in the program and actually shut it down entirely. So I know there's a lot of examples, but what all of these cases clearly shows is that it wasn't just about one daycare or one nonprofit or even one program. It was a connected pattern that kept feeding into one another, and the more I looked into it, the more obvious it became. But if this continues to happen and again at this scale, the next question becomes, why? Well, there are many reasons that I'll get into, but just like with money goals you may have after New Year's, it's hard to know where to start. And traditional banking often makes it harder than it needs to be. That's where today's sponsor, Chime, comes in. And what stood out to me most is their high yields.
We're flying through this. Chapter
There's
2.
3 clear reasons. The first is a troubling pattern that in almost every case, clear red flags were repeatedly ignored. And a clear red flag is that spending kept growing far faster, yet oversight didn't keep up with growth. I mean, take the Housing Stabilization Services. It was originally projected to cost about $2.5 million a year, but by 2021, it was $21 million. And in 2022, it was $42 million. And by 2023, it was $74 million and broke $100 million by 2024. It's the same story with Feeding Our Future. Subsidies went from $3 million to nearly $200 million in just 2 years. And in both of these cases, even if government officials wanted to do the right thing, the fraud architecture made it so they simply couldn't. As of 2025, the entire child care assistance program was overseen by just 4 investigators in the whole state of Minnesota. So fraud was usually caught only after someone filed a complaint or when law enforcement stepped in, like the autism therapy case.
So they have no checks and balances. That's all this is. That's all it is. No one's going behind people making sure everyone's doing the paperwork right. No one's going behind and going into these facilities and these businesses and these not-for-profits and these fake daycares and these fake homeless shelters. No. It's only when people file a claim that something like this is going to get flagged. It's only when law enforcement steps in is when something like this is going to get flagged. So it has to be someone like Nick Shirley or another U.S. citizen find something suspicious to get them caught, because everyone's all in on it. Tim Walz is all in on it. Everyone's getting broken off. Everyone's getting broken off.
And even in these instances where scam was exposed, the same scammers can just whip up a new LLC and repeat the process under a different name.
They had to shut down because there were so many violations, and they went and they just reopened under a new license, and they renamed the center Super Kids Daycare Center, LLC.
So they got shut down, then started another one.
Literally the next day.
So it really was like the state was handing bad actors everything they needed to commit fraud at scale. And I think this becomes undeniable, which leads me to the second feature of this fraud architecture, where the connections weren't just among scammers, but these scams were also connected to the very people that were assigned to prevent these frauds in the first place. In the Feeding Our Future case, employees inside the organization took bribes, helped create shell companies, and pushed fake paperwork through the system. And while public officials may not have directly participated that we know of, some of the money found its way into politics. Some of the indicted individuals made campaign donations to the mayor of Minneapolis. And it was the same thing for Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's campaign, where it's found that she accepted donations that were connected to the fraud, but she did return them later after it became clear where they came from. But the point is, it shows how dirty money finds its way to campaigns to make people look the other way or to get them political access. So again, there is no evidence that any of these politicians were involved in wrongdoing, but it was only after Nick's video that the Minnesota governor, Tim Walz, ordered audits of 14 high-risk programs for fraud. And so he does this, but a few weeks later, Walz drops out of the race for re-election.
So I've decided to step up.
Because a 23-year-old took him down. He's exposed. That's why he dropped out. He know that he's not trying to get, he himself is not trying to get exposed for the money that he's getting broken off. The money laundering that he's getting taken from this fraud too. Don't get it twisted. Tim Walz is getting money too, man. Ilhan Omar went from negative net worth to over 30 million net worth. You don't think Tim Walz got another 20 million from all this fraud? And it's over 500 mil, and he knew about the fraud when he first stepped in? Come on, man. Don't get me started on these other Congress people. They already know what's going to happen in the stock market, like Nancy Pelosi. Don't get me started on them. Come on.
Out of this race, and I'll let others worry about the election while I focus on the work that's in front of me for the next year.
So again, no clear evidence, but the timing does speak for itself. And this keyword of timing also rounds out the third and final reason why it got out of hand. While these scams were always happening to a smaller degree, the pandemic made them 100 times worse. Because as the government scrambled to keep the aid going, they also relaxed the rules and oversight across their programs. It's why Feeding Our Future became the largest pandemic fraud in the country, because waivers allowed off-site meal delivery and key verification steps were removed. It's the same pattern across daycares and Medicaid fraud. And put simply, scammers simply took advantage of that timing. So when red flags are ignored,
so you got Biden got all this regulation and all this other nuance and all this other Democratic regulation, all these other places. They're trying to hide that regulation with all the BS stuff that the right-wing people don't want when it comes to starting up a business and getting things going. They're hiding all the regulation through fraud. This proves my point. This proves why they all getting broken off, because this is how they're hiding all the paperwork, just like that.
Many players stand to benefit, and a global emergency created the perfect timing for bad actors to exploit the vulnerability. It created a fraud architecture in Minnesota that was undeniably unique. But at the same time, if there was even a precedent for people to travel to other states like Minnesota for fraud tourism, something tells me it's not the only fraud destination. Because here's the thing, if Minnesota is only the 22nd populous state in the 20th biggest economy, yet the programs targeted like daycare subsidies, meal services, and Medicaid benefits aren't unique to Minnesota, then the real story isn't just what happened there. The real question becomes, what's stopping it from happening across America? And what I found in many states is that it's already begun. As early as 2010, a federal investigation found that at least 5 states were approving childcare subsidies using fake identities. And some were so bad that in Texas, investigators tested the system by submitting paperwork under the name of a dead person and it still got approved. And in Washington, auditors are currently reviewing a childcare subsidy program worth roughly $770 million, and so far the audit is already uncovering millions in questionable payments.
That's a tactic that the cartel loves to do. The cartel loves to take the identities of homeless people and dead people. And that's how they're getting all this fraud and then they're getting all these government money. So when they help illegal people cross, they getting broken off with, they giving them from SA and all that other stuff. They're also getting money by stealing identities, signing up for government programs, and then they're getting that money right back to Mexico, right back to the other islands, right back over to Somalia. That's how it works.
Which has already led to one conviction. And it's the same story for food aid. So far, no state has matched Minnesota's $250 million Feeding Our Future scam, but in Texas and Pennsylvania, federal prosecutors are already uncovering multi-state meal program fraud schemes, where a Texas operator registered a sham nonprofit, then would file meal claims through Pennsylvania child nutrition programs for food that was never served. And turns out that same ringleader has already been banned from similar feeding programs in other states, but simply crossed state lines and started again under a new nonprofit. So again and again, if you build a system that allows bad actors to exploit the vulnerabilities, fraud is all but certain to happen. And nowhere is this more apparent than in the case of Medicaid. Medicaid is already the largest safety net program in the United States, and it's exactly why fraud runs rampant. In fact, there's literally a statistic that they track every year of fraud, waste, and error called the National Medicaid Improper Payment Rate, and that sat at around 5% in 2024. And in some years, it's even hit 10%, which means billions of your tax dollars each year are being wasted across multiple states. In Florida, fraud operators billed Medicaid for home health and therapy services that were never provided. In Michigan, investigators uncovered transportation and home care schemes where companies billed for phantom rides and visits, even if the patients never left their homes. In New York, there's been a long history of Medicaid fraud where so-called therapy mills would excessively bill for completely fabricated treatments while targeting vulnerable patients. And there's hundreds of others, but the clear...
You know this, man, is all Democratic states. He said Pennsylvania, Michigan.
First example also came during the pandemic. In Illinois, authorities uncovered an $83 million COVID testing scheme where labs billed the state and insurers for tests that were never run, results that were never delivered, and services patients never requested. And so again, the pattern is consistent across all. The programs are built fast, oversight comes later, and scammers rush in before safeguards are ever in place. So whether Minnesota is uniquely corrupted can be debated. But what's clear is that one state's weakness can't be ignored. In a world where people travel just to commit these frauds, that same weakness becomes a template that makes fraud scale across 50 states. So now the most important question becomes, will anything actually change? Because the optimist in me wants to believe that the exposure to fraud has finally gotten too big to ignore, and that exposure will finally lead to accountability. But the realist in me wonders if this is just another cycle, where people get angry for a while, but the system quietly stays the same. Because almost the exact same week this daycare fraud blew up, 2 other things happened. The Pentagon quietly announced that it's failed its 8th audit in a row, and trillions of dollars were unaccounted for again. And on the exact same day, a long-promised public document was released, only to arrive heavily redacted that leads to no concrete conclusions or accountability. So whether change will come or not will come down to this question. Can the same institutions that allow this level of fraud ever be trusted to police itself? And if media serves as any indication, the answer doesn't look too great. Because what we're seeing now isn't clarity, but a story split in 2. Right-leaning outlets are focusing on corrupt Democrats, incompetent journalists, with a sprinkle of the race and migrant angle. But if you're gonna play the moral high ground, it's pretty damn clear that fraud isn't a Democrat-only problem, nor a Somali community-only problem. And if local reporters were the ones who exposed the Feeding Our Future fraud back in 2022, it's hard to say that Minnesota journalists aren't doing their jobs. And on the left, it hasn't been any better. Even when they went to the same daycares, it's like they're spending more time attacking Nick than acknowledging the fraud he was pointing at. And I think that pisses me off because I've lived it myself. In 2023, I filmed a ride-along with cops in Brazil, and instead of covering the very real crime problem that I showed, mainstream outlets focused more of their efforts on attacking me. But the point is, if both sides keep fighting over the wrong things, will we ever fix the real problems? Because at the end of the day, whether it's $1 or millions, or the person who did it was Somalian, Italian, Brazilian, reptilian, or a civilian, it won't change the fact that money that was supposed to help families and kids instead became a paycheck for people who learned how to game the system. So whether anything truly changes remains to be seen, but one thing is for certain. In a world of money and power, there are only two kinds of people. Those who understand the system well enough to exploit it, and those who understand it well enough to use it for good. And maybe it's delusion, but that's the hope behind this channel. So if you want to get smarter about money and power in 5 minutes...
All right, man, that's the end of the video, man. Shout out to your boy Jen. Shout out to Nick Shirley. Man, shout out to everybody who's uncovering this fraud because it's happening all over the country. This is your boy Drippin' in Fitness. I'm out.